Carmen, an underestimated wife controlled by her husband Benjamin and belittled by his mother Dorothy, discovers not only his affair with Veronica but also that he's laundering money through shell companies. Instead of confronting him, she quietly becomes a confidential informant for law enforcement, gathers evidence, and orchestrates a reveal during their divorce hearing. The judge exposes Benjamin's crimes, federal agents arrest him, and Carmen secures protection, legitimacy of her portion of assets, and her freedom, reclaiming her power in front of the very people who tried to erase her. The fluorescent lights hummed like insects trapped in plastic. A stenographer adjusted her headset. Someone coughed into a sleeve. And I, hands folded, skirt hem grazing my knees, watched a drop of condensation race down a paper cup and stop at the rim, as if the lip of cheap water had more mercy than the people who brought me here. Across the aisle, Benjamin wore that courtroom smile that says I own the story. His tie knot sat like a fist at his throat. His lawyers, 3 of them, leaned inward, murmuring, their watches glinting every time a page turned. He didn't look at me at first. He didn't need to. The room was furnished to flatter him. Behind him, a perfume like winter citrus arrived a half-second before she did. Veronica's mouth was painted with the kind of red that makes white teeth into weapons. She placed a hand on the back of Benjamin's chair and left it there, an ornament on a possession. 2 rows over, Dorothy folded her cardigan like a flag after a funeral and gave me the tidy smile of a woman who never gets her shoes dirty herself. She hires the world to keep the mud away. Case number, the clerk began, but all I could hear was the small, private sound of Benjamin's tongue catching the inside of his cheek. His tell before a performance. He used to do that when I asked if we could afford lampshades. He finally turned, and the smile flickered. Not at my face, but at the ring indent still pressed into the base of my finger. It had taken 2 weeks for the skin to spring back. Indentations, like habits, release at their own pace. He leaned to his lawyer and spoke without moving his lips. The same whisper he used in kitchens and car rides, the murmur that always came right before a rule. I couldn't make out the words, but I could feel the weight of them, like a palm pressing a head underwater. It had used to be ours, the little code of marriage. Then it became his. Raise your right hand, the bailiff said. I did. It was steady. Funny thing about fear, if you don't feed it, it grows quiet and watches. Mr. Harrison, his lead counsel, rose, silver hair combed into authority. Your Honor, this is a simple matter. Nothing about this was simple. Not the suit Benjamin wore, more expensive than a month of groceries. Not the way Veronica's lipstick bled a whisper past the edge, like she'd smiled too hard in a bathroom mirror. Not the pearl glint at Dorothy's ear and neat, pale moon that reflected only itself. Judge Hawkins looked over half-moon glasses. Sharp eyes. Tired mouth. The kind of woman who'd been called sweetheart by boys who'd fail her tests. She nodded once and the room exhaled. I touched the thin envelope under the legal pad in front of me. The paper inside didn't shake. It had learned my heartbeat months ago. It lay there like a promise. Not revenge, not even justice. Something colder. Something true. Benjamin's knee jittered. A small movement. A tremor under a city. I had been the city once. Today, I was the fault line. Proceed, the judge said. And the first brick of his last story was lifted. There was a time the house loved me back. Light collected in bowls on the dining table. Basil grew shoulder-high in March. I taped postcards inside pantry doors. Turin, Oaxaca, a thrifted black and white of a woman laughing at the sea. I thought that meant something about who we were becoming. It started small. A red pen circling coffee receipts like sins. It adds up, he'd say, and tilt the statement toward me as if the numbers were an inside joke I was refusing to share. He took my card for convenience. He took my PIN so we don't forget it. He took the grocery list and returned it with brand names written like commandments. I adapted. That's what good wives do when a marriage shifts. You become lighter, so he doesn't have to carry anything. You become silent, so he can hear himself think. Dorothy came on Sundays with her perfume that smelled like pressed linens and old decisions. She complimented the plates and insulted the flowers by calling them brave. She told stories about a woman named Veronica as if recounting a parable about good taste. Such restraint, she'd say, which is the prettiest word there is for hunger. We could use professional help with the guest rooms, she added once, slicing roast into measured squares. Your eye is spirited. Spirited, Benjamin repeated, and the word went up on a shelf with all the other labels he'd glued to me: impulsive, tender, impractical, sweet. I learned to read calendars like they were diaries. Meetings named for clients that didn't exist. The initial V showing up like a watermark. A suit I didn't recognize checked in at a cleaner I didn't frequent. The odor of a cologne I had not watched him unscrew. The first time I followed him, I dressed like a woman who didn't exist: cap, plain sneakers, the kind of sunglasses you buy at a pharmacy at midnight. I parked far enough to feel pathetic and close enough to feel sick. He wasn't alone. The woman beside him moved like a metronome, everything on cadence, everything meant to be watched. They chose the restaurant where he once told me we couldn't justify dessert. He ordered dessert. They fed each other stainless steel laughs and the kind of glances that rewrite histories. I did not cry. I catalogued. I noted the timestamp on the receipt the waiter slid under his palm. I photographed a reflection in a window, his hand on her wrist, the mirror's city flipped backward so the street name read like a warning. Back home, I found the folder by accident, which is to say I had been preparing for that accident my whole life. The key was where anyone would hide it if they wanted to be found. Personal, the tab said. Inside, statements from banks with names that faked virtue. Transfers that hopped like stones across a dark river. LLCs that owned properties I had dusted. I took photos with a quiet phone and a quieter breath. I put everything back exactly where I found it, including my doubt. A name slid across my mind like a match: Lisa. We hadn't spoken in a year because I stopped calling the parts of myself that remembered passwords. I dialed anyway. She listened with all her attention turned forward, the way people do when they know a bridge is out and you're 3 turns away from it. This is bad, she said softly. This is criminal. There is a sound a life makes when it changes lanes. You don't hear it unless you're very still. I could hear it on the line, folding itself into a number she pressed into my palm over coffee: Detective Antonio Rivera. Whatever you do, she added, eyes steady, don't let him notice you're getting louder. I went home and set every clock in the house to the same time. It felt like a promise. Police stations smell like paper, ambition, and old coffee. Detective Rivera's office had one window and no curtains. He cleared a stack of files with the flat of his hand and spread my photos like a bad tarot. Shell companies with names that sounded like thrift store Bibles. Cash deposits arriving like tides, departing like a magician's scarf. This pattern, he said, tapping with a pen. It doesn't happen by mistake. What happens to wives when it does? I asked. He didn't answer that right away. He looked at my ringless finger, at the pale trench the gold had dug, at the neat handwriting I'd used to label each file. Then he said, if you help us, you'll need to be better at pretending than you've ever been. He explained the risks without adjectives. He spoke about informants as if he were describing people who existed on the other side of glass. Then he slid a document across the desk and waited. I read the agreement like it was a spell I might mispronounce. Immunity for acts incidental to cooperation, protection, the right to retain assets proven untainted. My name on the line looked like someone else's survival. I signed. They wired me with a machine no bigger than a lipstick. It warmed against my ribs like a second heartbeat. They trained my ear to listen for specific phrases, for sums, for names that meant doors opening on rooms you never return from. They asked me to gather files and overheard sentences and to never, ever improvise. Back home, the world narrowed into tasks. I placed a recorder under the desk where he used to nudge my foot during dinners with clients. I mirrored his passwords in graphite on my thigh, then washed the marks away until my skin remembered them on its own. I learned the map of his anger and walked around it, never stepping in wet concrete. The first close call arrived with the sound of his keys. I had a flash drive inside the computer, a file tree open like a ribcage. The cursor sat on a folder named Tax. The front door clicked. The dog, our neighbors, actually always visiting, barked. The screen blinked a bright, accusing blue. I pulled the drive with a fingernail and swept dust from the desk with the back of my hand. By the time he crossed the threshold, I was slicing a lemon I did not need. "Smells good," he said. "It's just a lemon," I answered, and wondered if I'd always been this funny. At night, information gathered in the corners like the dust behind furniture you move only when guests are coming. Names. Drop points. A ringtone he reserved for a man called Carlos. A phrase, "wash and park," that meant buying a property, pouring the money through it, and letting it sit until it looked clean. He grew careless in his happiness with Veronica and careless in his contempt for me. Contempt makes men sloppy. Once, Veronica called while I was folding shirts. Her voice sounded surprised to encounter another woman in a house she thought was already hers. "Is he there?" she asked, and used a nickname for him I had never heard, something soft and absurd, like a dessert. "He's in the shower," I said, which was true, and pressed the phone into the laundry pile, recording the static of a life that would eventually catch fire. Later, I labeled the file with the date and the sound the water made. By the end of the second week, the evidence felt heavier than the furniture. I slept in increments and woke to the taste of keys. Detective Rivera's texts were brief and precise. The prosecutor, Chin, kept her hands flat on the table when she spoke, like a person holding a map in a storm. We were building a shape out of numbers and pride. And then the twist inside the twist. He wasn't only laundering. He was skimming from the men he laundered for. The audio caught him laughing, describing his bonus, with a word that meant theft, wearing it like cologne. I stared at the waveform on my laptop. It looked like a seismograph mid-quake. "This," Rivera said, when I played it for him, "is the part that gets people killed." "Or saved," I said. "If it's loud enough." The week before court, the house became a stage with only one set. Every room memorized the choreography: keys, files, drawer, laugh, door. I moved through it like a ghost who knew where the floor creaked. Sometimes I forgot I had a voice. Then I'd catch myself humming, and the sound would frighten me back into the bone. Benjamin's happiness swelled with proximity to victory. He took calls on speaker now, a king in his castle. I learned the names of his lawyers by the rhythm of their advice. "Optics," one said, again and again. "We need optics." He rehearsed lines about my lack of contribution, with a sincerity that would have been beautiful if it weren't a lie. Liars are poets with no readers. Dorothy arrived midweek and walked my kitchen like an appraiser. "You'll land on your feet," she cooed, the way people talk to stray cats. Some women are better suited to simpler arrangements. Modest is a kind of dignity. I watched her lean against the island I'd sanded and stained myself and pictured telling her the truth. Instead, I set a cup in front of her and turned it so the handle pointed toward her right hand. "Old habits. Sugar." "I don't take it," she said. Of course she didn't. Veronica sent a text to the number she thought he alone read, blue suit or black. He typed back, blue. "It photographs better." He did not photograph better. He looked expensive and hollow, like a vase in a lobby. The recorder in his car went quiet for 2 days. The battery had died. I replaced it in a parking garage with a maneuver I had practiced until my fingers forgot why. He almost caught me, whistling as he crossed between SUVs. I dropped into the passenger seat and pretended to search for my phone. He opened the door, found me there, and smiled as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "What are you doing?" "Looking for you," I answered, and he kissed my temple and told me I was sweet. My skin didn't flinch. Progress. Rivera wanted to move. "We have enough. He's arrogant and sloppy. We can pick him up tomorrow." "Not tomorrow," I said. I needed one more moment. Not for drama, though drama would be delicious. For permanence. For a public record that wouldn't be washed away by deals made in rooms without windows. "You're asking us to let him keep breaking the law so you can watch his face," Prosecutor Chin said. The truth of that stung. I chose a different version. "I'm asking you to let him finish the story he started." She waited. 1 week. We opened a new folder for the last stretch, court. I printed a letter on paper that felt like an oath. I wrote exactly what I had learned, with dates, with amounts, with the names of the banks that pretend to be islands. I did not mention Veronica's perfume or Dorothy's pearls, or the way Benjamin looked at himself in any reflective surface when he thought I wasn't watching. There are truths and there are satisfactions. I picked the kind that stands up in daylight. The night before the hearing, he slept badly. He muttered, kicked, flung an arm across me like he owned even gravity. I lay awake counting the seconds between police sirens and thinking of women I would never meet reading this transcript someday, understanding the language of cages. At breakfast, he held my gaze as if he'd finally found the field where my stubbornness grew. Whatever happens, he said, the voice he uses for my benefit, I want you to know I tried. You did, I said, and slid a plate toward him with the casual generosity of someone who already knows the ending. Outside, the basil had died. November is not kind to plants that pretend it's still summer. I crushed a leaf between my fingers anyway and let the green oil stain my skin. It smelled like a story about to change key. Courtrooms hide 100 mirrors. You see yourself in a framed diploma, in the curve of a silver pen, in a window that shows you your back. I watched myself today as if I were a stranger I might root for. Mr. Harrison rose. His voice poured into the room like varnish. He called me unskilled without saying the word. He described my life as leisure and my labor as a hobby. He did this with an elegance that would have been impressive if the goal weren't erasure. The gallery nodded the way people nod when something confirms what they already want to believe. I spoke when asked to. I didn't sell tears. I didn't trade dignity for sympathy. In the ledger of their performance, that made me look smaller. That was fine. People underestimate quiet and then complain when it becomes thunder. When it was almost over, when Benjamin's lawyers had displayed their charts and Veronica had traced circles on the back of his chair with one manicured finger and Dorothy had rehearsed acceptance on her face like a posture, Mr. Peterson stood. He looked like a man who'd been told to put out a fire with a pitcher of water and had decided to bring the ocean in a glass. Your Honor, he said, and his voice surprised even him, steady and clear, we have one more item for the court's consideration. An envelope. Off-white. Ordinary. The kind of paper that holds utility bills and other truths. Judge Hawkins accepted it without ceremony, the way you would take a letter from a neighbor, and slid it with a nail file as if this were gossip slipped under a door. She read. Her face did not perform. Then, like a shadow deciding it would rather be a bird, her mouth moved. She looked over her glasses at Benjamin, at his counsel, at the immaculate mouth behind him, and then she did something you don't see much in court. She laughed. It wasn't cruel. It was recognition, a human sound made when two stories finally collide and the real one stands up. She removed her glasses, rubbed the bridge of her nose, and read the names aloud. The LLCs, the banks, the offshore accounts, the transfers, the dates. She read the words skimming and paused long enough for it to settle. Detective Antonio Rivera, she added, like a coda. Cooperating witness. Audio recordings. Photographic evidence. Benjamin stood so fast his chair scraped the floor raw. This is ridiculous. She doesn't sit, the judge said, not loud, and a bailiff's boot moved a single inch. Veronica turned the color of paper, which is to say she became a surface upon which anything could be written. Dorothy's mouth parted without producing sound. For once, she had no noun for me. Judge Hawkins continued, voice dry. Miss Hayes, counsel may advise you separately regarding the risks associated with retaining gifts purchased with illicit funds. A murmur rippled like wind through grass that didn't know it could bend. Harrison leaned into Benjamin, whispered urgencies. Benjamin shook him off and found me with his eyes. There it was, the first honest thing he had given me in years. Fear. Not for me. For himself. He tried a last script. You don't know these people, he said, voice aimed at me, not the bench. You don't know what they do to thieves, the judge supplied. Mr. Foster, your concern for your associates is noted. The courtroom doors opened with a hush so complete it felt choreographed. Rivera entered with 2 agents and the kind of calm that makes guilty men see the future in segments. The cuffs glinted not as threat, but as tool. They read him rights with the courtesy the law demands. Benjamin looked at me as if there were a rope between us, and I had finally put it down. Carmen, he said, and my name sounded like a thing you say when you trip. I know, I answered, because I did. And because there was nothing left to translate. You could feel the room resettle, furniture shifting an inch inside everyone's mind. Outside, a siren began somewhere far away. You couldn't tell if it was coming closer. Inside, the judge spoke of seizure, of percentages traceable to legitimate income, of support and reward, of protection. She spoke as if describing whether, inevitable, impartial, here. The gavel did not slam. It tapped. Enough. Afterward, the hallways smelled like copy paper and steel handrails. People pretended not to stare. Veronica walked fast, heels skittering, the sound of a life moving to a different address. Dorothy sat on a bench, as if resting at mile 19 of a marathon she forgot to train for. She watched me with something that might have been calculation and might have been the first small draft of regret. Empires fall quietly. It's the dust that makes the news. I stepped outside and the air cut clean. November sun on concrete makes its own kind of mercy. I stood there longer than necessary, because sometimes freedom arrives like a thing you can't pick up yet. The phone buzzed. Lisa, are you okay? I typed, yes. It's done. She sent a heart, the simple kind, the kind that means I stayed. Rivera emerged, loosened his tie, and gave me a nod that carried more gratitude than ceremony allows. You did what most people can't, he said. You held still in a storm. I moved, I said. Same thing, he replied, and let the afternoon swallow him. Back home, the rooms had exhaled. Even the table looked relieved. I put water on and watched the coil glow. A small, ordinary magic I had forgotten belongs to me. I opened a window. Cold air spilled in and touched everything I own, which is to say, me, and a kettle, and a notebook that now contained a plan that wasn't about escape, but about arrival. The numbers would be sorted by people whose fingerprints are evidence of nothing. 40% remained legitimate. That was the figure in the judge's mouth, clean and heavy as fruit. It would be enough to move, to change locks, to buy linens because I loved the shade of them, not because someone else's guests required a color. Enough to start work again and remember passwords and pack a lunch and tape new postcards to a new pantry door, this time with the backs blank because I didn't need to prove I'd been anywhere to anyone. I found the ring in a drawer where I keep bandages. I pressed it to the indent and saw the circle line up like a lie ready to be worn again. I set it down. Skin is astonishing. It learns and unlearns. That night, I wrote a letter I would never send. Dear future stranger, it began. Here is how you know you're not crazy. The story you're told about yourself won't let you breathe. Take one breath anyway. That's your proof. Now take another. I folded the paper and slid it between pages of a book about a woman who built a house with a hammer that wasn't hers to begin with. Sleep came like a guest who finally knows your address. I dreamed of basil in winter, green against the odds. In the morning, I didn't check a calendar that lied. I poured coffee into a mug with a chip, the flaw that makes it mine, and stood by the window while the water on the sill condensed and slid, obedient to gravity and nothing else. At noon, I walked to a narrow office with frosted glass and sat across from a woman who read my resume like it wasn't an apology. Marketing? She asked. Strategy, I said, and surprised myself with how accurate that felt. She smiled. We need someone who can turn noise into signal. I can, I told her. I already had. On the way home, I passed a storefront where a mannequin stood in a blue suit that photographs well. I kept walking. The street was loud. A siren started up somewhere, and I could finally tell whether it was coming closer or going away. It was going away.